Today we are going to unpack the pros and cons of using heart rate and power, and also share with you at the end of the video which one we prefer. I'm Coach Parry from CoachParry.com, where we help you get fitter, faster, stronger. I'm going to hand over to Dev so he can kick things off.
So, do they measure the same thing? The short answer in theory is yes. We're measuring, it's a way of monitoring or measuring intensity, but where it differs is heart rate or heart rate monitors measure an internal response to intensity that you're doing. So how is your body physiologically responding to the workload you're putting on? The power meter, where it differs, is now the external workload that you're actually applying. So the external workload, the watts in power, has a response on heart rate as the body's response to that power workload. So that's just to be able to differentiate the two on what heart rate does, what power does. But yes, in theory, they're measuring the same thing, and they're a way for us to monitor how hard we are working.
Let's talk about the advantages of using heart rate and or power. Heart rate is great because it's literally a reflection of what is happening inside of you. What that allows you to do is to work out precisely what you're trying to get out of a session, and then band those workouts into zones. So you've often heard people talking about zone 1, 2, 3, and 4, or aerobic zone, sub-threshold, threshold, and so on. You can now assign a value or a range of values of heart rate that will let you know that you are in fact doing the exact workout that you are aiming to do. And that means that while you are training, you can keep track by looking at your heart rate monitor to see if you are in fact doing what you set out to do in your workout in the first place. Power is also really good because we can do very simple tests to help to figure out where those zones are, and the feedback from power is instant. So that means that because it's been calculated with gyroscopes on your foot pod, it takes into account whether you are going uphill, downhill, or on the flats. So immediately, whether you are running on a flat surface, going uphill or downhill, you'll know that a particular power is going to link in with a type of workout that you are trying to plan. And because the feedback is so instant, you can make immediate adjustments to make sure that you stay in the exact zone that you are planning to do that session in. That makes sure that you get the physiological adaptations that you are after in today's session. Of course, with every tool that we use, there are disadvantages to using that. So while heart rate is fantastic because it lets us know exactly what is happening inside, one of the things that we must accept and understand about heart rate is that there is a delay in what's happening inside us, reaching steady state or equilibrium when things change, and when it reflects on our watch unit that is relaying that heart rate information. So two examples of this are when we get to a hill and you start running up a hill. There is an immediate change in effort. We can often feel it, but because we are who we are and we're kind of in a groove, we often just carry on with that. And it can be 45 seconds to a minute before the change in effort is reflected in our heart rate. So it can be up to a minute up the hill where you suddenly realize, hang on, I've been working too hard. And so it's important to note that it does require some practice to use heart rate so that you learn to tap off or back off almost as you get to a hill, so that when the heart rate and effort catch up, you've adjusted your intensity enough that you don't overpower the hills. Heart rate also is very difficult to use when we are doing short intervals. Any interval that's less than 2 minutes, your heart rate isn't going to catch up to match the intensity that you are striving for. And in intervals of 2 to 4 minutes, very similar to the hills, it can be easy to overpower the initial part of the interval trying to get your heart rate up. So again, there is some learning and practice that is involved in using heart rate, but as long as we are aware of those limitations, we can factor them and learn over time. The disadvantages of power are that it is an estimated number derived from a prediction of speed that is picked up from gyroscopes. That is quite accurate. So for me, I'm not too concerned about that, but it is always important to know that is a estimated or calculated power, and then it takes into account your own body weight, which is good because it's individualized. And then lastly, the feedback is instant because it then takes into account your vertical ascent meters. But because it is effectively a calculated measure, it's specific to the individual, number one, and number two, we know that it's not always going to be completely accurate, and we know, especially if you're trying to use it as a tool for pacing in a race, we know that it slightly overreads on the ups, we know that it slightly underreads on the downs. So it's not a great tool for using in race conditions. It is accurate enough that it puts you in the right ballpark for training conditions. And then the final thing that you need to know about power, where it can be a little bit of a disadvantage, is that depending on the type of shoe that you're wearing, minimalist shoe, more cushion shoe, carbon shoe, and also where and exactly how the laces are tied on the shoe, these are all things that make differences in those power readings. So you also almost need to get to a point where you know the nuances in each shoe. As with all things, once you get these learnings out, it's a great tool to use, largely because of how instant the feedback is.
Now that we know the pros and cons of this, the question very often comes in is, should you be using heart rate or power? One or the other, or both, or all of the metrics all around? I often say to people that it is quite powerful to use more than one metric, because very often that allows you to really sort of infer a lot of data from different sorts of ideas. So some sort of internal variable, so whether that's a heart rate or a rate of perceived exertion, very powerful to use. And then along with that, an external variable, so pace or power or something like that. So using more than one variable is very often very useful in how you interpret your data and your training. However, there's a small caveat here that I think sometimes too many metrics can get you a little bit confused and maybe be really looking too much into the data and not just enough into the training. Sometimes I think that when we have too many metrics, what we'll end up doing is we're always going to find the metric that isn't performing at the way we want it to and really sort of analyze that too much and then go out and train even harder. So my advice is to really find one or two metrics that you can use reliably and then really use those consistently over time and start creating trends and how that affects your training.
So at the end of all of that, which is the one that we prefer at Coach Parry and why? I prefer heart rate, and I opened up by saying that heart rate is an actual reflection of what is happening inside. As long as we know that the data that we are measuring is accurate, in other words, you are using an accurate heart rate monitor as was explained in the video, then we can safely say that we know that what we are training is what we are planning to train, given the limitations and the learnings that we need to do to make sure that we use the tool to the best of its ability. I think that using the two in combination is a fantastic tool. Power is a really good objective way of tracking change. So how do we do that? How does your power change over time at given heart rates? So it's a really great tool to use in combination to track progress for yourself, and then when you get to very specific workouts, particularly those that are shorter than 2 minutes, it then becomes better to plan your sessions using power and pace and using heart rate afterwards to track how you are improving relative to each other. If you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, please do. Click the like button, and if you want to dig a little bit more into maximum heart rate or threshold heart rate, we've created 2 great videos and you can watch those now.